So good afternoon, everybody. This is going to be a great topic today. We've had a chance to talk to the speaker a little bit, and it's a really important topic for the times. It's also very close to our DNA in the college, so I think you'll enjoy this. I just wanted to give a couple of announcements, and then we'll turn it over to Keo, who will do the intro. So we have LACES and AIA credits available just outside and forms. I think Christine is sick today, but I think the forms are there. And the next two and final two speakers for the season, for the semester, Adrian Scott Fine will be here on next Monday. And then on April 14th, we will have the annual Ethan Moore Whitehead, thank you, memorial lecture in sustainability, and our speaker on that night will be Felix Heisel. There also will be, for those of you who have some connection to Ethan, who is a student who unfortunately passed away a few years ago, there will be a special presentation by President Mearns on that night, so it's going to be a special night. That one, by the way, will break the trend of the 4 o'clock lecture. It'll be a reception at 4 on the 14th, and then we'll do the lecture starting at 5 o'clock. So with that, I'll turn it over to Keo for the intro.
All right, hello everyone. It is my pleasure today to introduce Emily. So Emily Roush Elliott became interested in socially impactful architecture as a student. She points to two impactful events that influenced her decision. The first is studying abroad in Buenos Aires, Argentina, and the second is building homes in Biloxi, Mississippi after Hurricane Katrina. In 2013, Emily was awarded an Enterprise Rose Architectural Fellowship that took her and her partner Richard to the Mississippi Delta. The two founded Delta Design Build Workshop called Delta DB, which is a social impact design build organization that builds equity through the built environment in the Mississippi Delta. With Emily at the helm, Delta DB has managed over $9.5 million worth of in socially impactful design, construction, and development projects. Emily is a licensed architect, and for a little bit of fun, is also certified in wilderness first aid, is a licensed lead inspector, and is currently pursuing a level 1 cheese associate from the Academy of Cheese. I'm impressed. Emily has won many awards, including the AIA Citizen Architect Award and the AIA Young Architect Award. Please join me in welcoming Emily.
Thank you, Sarah. I am Mike. Thank you, Sarah. I've had such a fun day. I got here about 9:30 and have gone from studio to studio. I've gone to see projects around town. But what I'm surprised I heard was that you all are here because you're really deep in the semester. So thank you for wanting to come hear what I have to say when you might have had a moment to have a break. And I'm glad that I put the effort I did into this presentation since you're here. You know, if you give very many talks, you kind of use the same one a few times, right? But I hadn't spoken at a university in a while, and so this is brand new. This is first time, maybe the only time this presentation will ever be given. And so I was thinking, I turned 40 last October, and I thought, wow, it's been basically 20 years since I was in many of your seats. So I was really thinking about undergrad, and I thought, I listened to a lot of Paul Simon in undergrad. And so if you don't know Paul Simon, please look him up. I think the faculty gets my reference. We're going to talk about 50 ways to use your license, which is based on Paul Simon's 50 Ways to Lose Your Lover, which has these sort of similar rhyming. You can set yourself free. And so we're going to talk about my practice, which people call alternative often. But I think I don't have to say to this group, after talking with people all day today, that already you're thinking about architecture practice in a much broader way than it was presented to me 20 years ago. You're thinking about what you can do and what kinds of impacts it can have on the world already. So I hope that I can broaden your perspective further. I know that you're going to try to get some credits, so those are your learning objectives. And And so further reflecting on being in my 20s, I decided I'm going to frame this presentation around questions that people asked me that I didn't know the answers to. And I don't mean like professors or lecturers. I mean like my curious uncle at Thanksgiving or the chatty lady on the airplane who sat next to me. So this is the first question that I got many years ago and still get today. What kind of architect do you want to be? And really technically that could mean, do you want to do educational architecture? Do you want to do hospitals, residential? And the first time I was asked this, I thought, oh my gosh, is there a residency that you have to, kind of like medicine, you go on and specialize? The good news, if you don't already know, is no, you don't. You just have, you have the one degree that you're already pursuing probably, unless you choose to go for more. But then there's the kind of the ethos, right? What kind of architect do you want to be in the world? What kind of, do you want to contribute to climate, to socially impactful work, which is my passion? There's so many answers. And so just quickly, I'm going to go through a few people that are my peers that I have learned from. So Kate Mazed studied architecture, but really realized she was a good writer. And so she's an editor at Fort Worth Today and in incredibly high demand. There are very few people who study design and the built environment, but then say, I could write about this. She'll be employed her whole life with that expertise. Kristen Solorio has done a number of things, but most recently, he was a representative in the Arizona House of Representatives. So he used his architectural expertise for policy. Ray Demers has never worked directly on a project that I know of. He's a landscape architect, but what he has done over many years is he's run programs like Enterprise Green Communities, which is very similar to LEED. So he's orchestrating programs that many other designers are using. April de Simone is an architect. Most of these people are also licensed architects. Besides these, the italicized words, I pulled from their bios what they say first that they are. So April says she's a researcher and an activist, which is absolutely true. If you don't know Undesign the Red Line, it's an incredible exhibit that she led that went around the country. It's probably been 8 or 10 years now since it went around the country, but I think the fact that you probably all have learned about redlining or heard about it might partly be because April raised so much attention around that issue. Jeffrey Barton is an architect, but what he does, 40 hours a week is he's the CEO of an affordable housing development firm. I would bet that out of everybody up here, Jeffrey makes the most money. I don't know that. Jamie Blosser is an arts administrator, first and foremost. She ran the Santa Fe Art Institute for many years and now is the CEO of Midtown Arts and Design. Joseph Kunkel works at Mass Design. He runs a Sustainable Native Communities Lab. He says, first and foremost, he's a community designer and an educator, and he relies on his expertise as a member of the Cheyenne Nation. I was Googling this just to see who I could add. Turns out 3 members of Pink Floyd studied architecture, so more money than Jeffrey. And Michael Bennett, I heard speak in January at a conference. Michael Bennett has an incredible furniture design. He's studying architecture, but you might know him when he won the Super Bowl with the Seattle Seahawks. So many, many ways to use your architecture and also many ways to get to architecture. But the way of practice that I know the best, of course, is my own practice. So Delta DB is my firm. I've lived in Greenwood, Mississippi, which I would say the girl who's standing, kind of right where her chin is. We're not on the coast. People always think we are. About 2 hours south of Memphis. And Greenwood is an incredible place. It's a very hard place to work. The racial inequities that are pervasive throughout our country are exacerbated to the extreme in Mississippi, but especially in this sort of northwestern, it's not quite a quadrant, but that northwestern area. My firm is deeply place-based. We are defined by where we work. We do a little bit of work in Alabama, but the vast majority of our work is within about an hour-and-a-half drive of where we live. This is my wonderful team. There are 6 of us that are full-time. We are all designers and builders with different percentages of our time spent on design and building. This is how I would graphically show the structure of my firm. So we're the Delta Design Build Workshop. But the Delta Design Build Workshop does not exist as a business, actually. We created this logo. We're very excited to be a nonprofit. We filed the paperwork with the state of Mississippi. We also created Design Build Solutions, a for-profit construction company at the same time. We said, great, we'll be a for-profit and a nonprofit. We never filed our 501c3 with the IRS because we never have needed to. Every 18 months or so, I do a gut check. Am I missing any opportunities because I'm not a nonprofit? And I'm not, so far that I can identify, because we have great partnerships. And what we realized was people need us to be experts of what we are experts of the built environment. They don't need us to have the tax status. Our partners bring that. So Delta DB actually is our doing business as name, and it's our favorite logo, so it gets elevated. So Design Build Solutions is a construction company. So we said, but we're a design build firm, architecture and construction under one roof. And the state of Mississippi said, no, can't do that. Our design build laws are too antiquated. So we set up overnight R19 architecture, and nobody ever sees that unless you're looking at a contract. But we have 3 firms under one roof, one that's just a shell, one for-profit architecture firm, and one for-profit construction company, no nonprofits. These are the values that we wrote over 10 years ago, and I love to revisit them because they're still true today, but I'm not going to read them to you because I think it's sort of this, you know, if you want to research us, put it in the paper. But how to get to really understand us is through our client types. We have 3 client types. As I said, one is nonprofits. They don't need me to be a nonprofit. They need me to share their values. They need me to be committed to community engagement or to community art spaces. Often they need me to be committed to meeting their very small budgets. And then we propose, you know, deliverables that we can do within that budget. We're not losing money just because it's a low budget. We might be able to take a smaller bite. Or maybe they hire us to create a rendering that goes into a grant application. Right? So nonprofits actually are where our work looks the most like a traditional architecture firm. So say the Quitman County Art Center in the top left, you know, we did a full drawing set for that, full CDs, construction documents of the ground floor, the upper floor, and renovating that space for them. So that's where we use our licenses the most. The second client type we have is small municipalities. Occasionally with small municipalities, we are doing drawing sets. We're also most likely with municipalities to design and build. So you can see a small pavilion for concerts, especially around Christmas parades in the upper and the middle, of a playground. But with small municipalities, we're also doing a lot of strategic planning, a lot of strategic thinking and helping those municipalities dive into how they can achieve their goals. And that can take on any form of capacity building. We can do envisioning. You can see the guy on the bottom left is a job training program where they said, you know, we have some funding, but we don't have anybody to complete, you know, this particular kind of work. Our third client type is homeowners, specifically low wealth owner occupants. And this is actually the core of our work. And I'm going to talk more specifically about projects through my next questions, and we'll get back to housing at the end. Who's heard this? Somebody said to you, like, I wanted to be an architect, but what? What did they say?
I'm not good at math.
Yes, I'm not good at math. And there's one other one. Yes, yes. Everybody says that. I wanted to be an architect, but I can't do math. I want to be an architect, but I can't draw. But I think the only thing you really have to have is to be able to envision something 3-dimensional that doesn't exist. You have to imagine it. And how exciting, right? I think that's like the sweet spot of what we do, right? There's a slab and there's a deteriorating house and there's no infrastructure, and we say, what if there was infrastructure? You know, what if there was a curb that actually drained well and there were lights that were powered by solar so nobody had to pay a utility bill on them, and this house got renovated and a new house showed up where a previous one was? It's really exciting. But the next thing I'm going to say, I feel like you don't have to hear because you said it all day today. It's not my ideas. If I show up with my idea, I'm the architect, and I'm like, I think there better be a house there, I've already messed up because this is not my neighborhood, right? My clients need me to be an expert of the built environment, because that's what I am. And they really need me to be a good listener because they're an expert of the place that they live or the place that they work. So here's my first example. This is the Rosedale Freedom Project. If you're not familiar with the Freedom Summer projects that happened in the 60s in Mississippi, please look them up. They're incredible. And there's 3 freedom projects that still exist to this day as an outgrowth of that. So you don't have to be an architect to look at this picture and have some ideas about what you would do to the Rosedale Freedom Project building. But we need to ask the experts. And so not only are we saying we have to do a community engagement, because you all already know that, how do we do community engagement well? And I think the way that I learned to do engagement, I would have reached out really broadly. I would have said, how many people can I get in this room to give me feedback on what's needed? But in more recent years, we've really narrowed in and said, like, who is the sort of deepest expert? And luckily with the Rosedale Freedom Project, the adults who run that program, they already want to elevate the voices of the experts, and that's the high schoolers who participate in the program. So the high schoolers came together and we assessed the building and we heard about what they liked and what they didn't like and what they wanted. So then we came back again and we did a participatory budgeting process with them where we said, this is a grant that's been secured. It's a really odd amount, not quite $40,000. And so all the students ranked in order what they wanted to see the most. And then we also, as much as possible with programs like the Freedom Project, we also do some education. And so we taught how to do SketchUp, and as a group created the SketchUp model, because the thing they wanted the most, even more than improving things like the heating and air, which I was shocked because it gets really hot in Mississippi, was an outdoor classroom. They needed more space to do more things, and they wanted a space that they could also feel really creative and feel sort of present and visible in their community. So they showed us what they needed, and then we're in charge of the columns and the trusses and thinking about where that classroom could be so it's in the shade. Playgrounds are a really interesting project because the building code can be tough, but playground code is super tough. And a lot of playgrounds are off the shelf. You kind of get a magazine and you go through it with your client and they pick their favorites. It's not the most exciting design. And a lot of people who run playgrounds, whether they're daycares or churches, they're pretty risk averse. But if you can get somebody who's engaged, and then, just like with the Rosedale Freedom Project where we got to talk to the high schoolers, in this case, we started working with a Head Start, and we said, please let us talk to your individual educators, right, to the people who are working with the 2 to 5-year-olds every day. And that group said, we really want to do some gardening. We want to do some raised beds. But what about when we don't do the raised beds? We don't want to make cat poop sandboxes. They also said, we work with 2 to 5-year-olds every day. And so we need to kind of be down low next to them, but I can't squat all the time. So what we came up with was this idea where there are these raised beds and then these benches that are on casters, and so you can slide them together like they are on the right, and you kind of have this big square bench and you don't even know there's a potential planter under there. Or you can slide them apart as it's starting to be slid apart on the left, and you can take those benches wherever you need them, or hopefully you can have some flowers growing. So we listened to them, and then they got on board with custom playground equipment after that. They trusted us after that. And so then we got to go really deep and say, like, what are you learning about and what are you excited about? And they said, we really like to teach about our local ecosystems. And so we started talking about what people get excited, and the little kids get really excited about alligators. So in this one, and it's not done yet, I got to get back to work because I'm behind schedule on this one. But we pitched to them in our next iteration of the playground, which is all ready. I just got to finish my gator head and drop them in, that we would do this custom alligator head. And none of these pictures do it justice. There's going to be a trike track that you can ride your tricycle through the alligator. He's going to have teeth, and he's going to have like rock climbing holds, so you can go all the way up and over him. And this is what I left when I left my office on Friday. So he's made out of that plastic lumber. And there's going to be 2 of them, so you can kind of see this one's just a skeleton, and that guy's starting to get some skin up in the background. And none of this would have happened if we hadn't been able to say, please let us talk to the teachers. Please let us listen to the teachers. I never would have thought of this, but I get to think about how to create it. It's this really sort of micro scale, right, that it's my job to think about the angles and the bolts and how to put it together. I also listen a lot in big community meetings. We don't always get to work directly with the students or directly with the teachers in these small groups. We also have to translate what we hear from big groups. So last year, working with Olin's daughter, Chloe, and greatly enjoying that, we started working in Alabama for the first time. So these are renderings from the Tuskegee, Alabama Strategic Plan. And in that case, we had many community meetings. We engaged through one-on-one interviews, we engaged through digital outreach in different ways, we went to festivals, and every town that you go to is so different. It's so easy to think, well, if there's 15,000 people in Greenwood, Mississippi, and there's about 16,000 people in Selma, Alabama, and they have these intense civil rights histories, they probably need the same things. Sure, there's some commonalities, but it's different. So Tuskegee people said, we actually have a lot of projects underway already. We have jobs coming. We think housing's on its way on its own. But here are these big picture ideas that we need the community to coalesce around. So we were able to create these renderings that represent them. So downtown revitalization. They called it state-of-the-art community recreation. And this was really about bridging Tuskegee University and the city of Tuskegee's resources. And then student housing with mixed use downstairs. And so these aren't ever going to be floor plans that we drew, right? This was about hearing, listening, and asking back and saying, what we're hearing you say is you have 3 big concepts that you need visualized, and we can do that for you. Selma was completely different. Like I said, you'd think it'd be really similar. It's not very far away, it's right down the road. And in Selma, they said, no, we need projects. Right? We've had too many visions. We have projects that are stuck. Help us think through them. So in this case, these were 3 nonprofits that came together and said, we want to develop this lot, but we're totally stuck because we only have one funding source and it's not enough. So we worked with them to design 3 different uses on the same site. So in this case, we hope, of course it hasn't happened yet, but we hope that there will be affordable housing, ideally for seniors or veterans, just based on the needs in the area. But in that kind of darker reddish color, we proposed a youth build, or the local community college is trying to expand their trades program for historic preservation work, so like brick tuck pointing and things like that. And this building needs all of that, and they could also be housed there. And then there's an art space just about a block away that needs more outdoor space for their sculptures and things. So I don't know if they'd ever make any money on that part, but we can dream. So totally different, right? These 2 large-scale engagement strategies led to different places. And I think, just like as I said earlier, I was so impressed that you all already know that it's about listening and it's about finding the right people to talk to. The last one I'm going to talk about in terms of engaging is that, and envisioning, is that it doesn't have, I said it had to be 3D, right? But I didn't say it had to be built at all. It has to have a way to be 3-dimensional. And one of the things we learned really early on was that in our community colleges in the Mississippi Delta area, there are trades pathways for electrical programs, plumbing, heating and air, but nothing for carpentry. And so we created a program a few different times over different years where we trained, it's called NCCER. We did the NCCER carpentry training program. And we also realized that, and this one is a whole study of its own, but we also started studying energy efficiency. And I know you all are looking closely at that also. We did blower door tests, and I always summarize this by saying when I was a kid, and we'd run out the door in the summer and we'd leave the door open, and my dad would say, we're not air conditioning the whole neighborhood. And what we learned is that we are. We all are. So these big numbers are 3 different housing topologies that we studied through blower door tests, and the number is not the utility bill. The number is the amount of the utility bill that is just lost through the building envelope. So of course you want your refrigerator on, and that's going to cost you some money, right? So if, let's say, it would have cost you $200 a month to have your refrigerator on and your lights on and whatever else you want to be on in your house, that house on the left, her $200, she's paying $376 because air conditioning is leaking out in the summer or heat is leaking out in the winter. So we combined those things, so our carpentry program became a carpentry and weatherization program. And in that case, we didn't do any engagement. And sometimes people ask me, like, what's your engagement? And it's actually just living there for many years now, right? And being really passionate about what we're passionate about and seeing the state of a lot of the housing. In America, our housing stock is the oldest it's ever been on average. The programs by which we can invest in our existing housing are very scattered. There's a lot of little different parts and pieces, and one program might even sort of compete with another one. So we used that sort of engagement knowledge in order to define programs where we envisioned them, We used our expertise as architects and expertise in the built environment to create programs, which I consider 3D. This one, I haven't been asked since undergrad, but I remember people saying, don't you take anything else? Because your schedule's usually too jam-packed. And even though it's so jam-packed, I think you must. So as a business minor, I look at this spreadsheet 2 to 3 times a week. It's what keeps my business afloat. I don't know what I would do if I didn't know how to run this myself. I took some public speaking classes, and I just find really enjoyable. So different groups that I've been a part of at different times, we've done webinars. Most recently, the Housing and Community Development Knowledge Community, it's a mouthful. At AI, I partnered with the National Low Income Housing Coalition, and we did this podcast series that you can find on Spotify. I didn't study as much as I wish I had of sort of economics and policy and research, so maybe I will soon. But the little bit that I have has really informed a lot of writing and research that my team has done. This is something that we call feed forward, and we bake it into our contracts whenever we can, that we plan the things we hope we can measure from start to finish when we do projects. And I think that's something I did not learn in architecture school, was we talk about post-occupancy evaluations as architects, but there's so much more to it than that. And even the name I've always had a problem with. It's not post-occupancy. We didn't move people in and then move them out again. It's mid-occupancy evaluations. I also took a studio in graduate school that nobody else wanted to take, the one that was really unpopular, but I loved it, and it led me to being a part of a nonprofit that I remain a part of today, and I got to move to Tanzania and be part of building the Roush Health Center in 2010. And now this building, the first one we built in 2010, is one of 5 buildings that are on that site. That's also a story, a lecture of its own. But what I would say here is that before moving to Tanzania, I took an African literature class. And it's a practice that I've continued my whole life, that I read fiction and nonfiction about whatever place I'm working, just as an added way to understand that place through the eyes of a local author. So my last question is a tricky one that only you could answer for yourself, right? And I always am surprised when people ask this. You know, you're on the plane and you're like, you can't ask me that. But the answer is that finances are just one of many bottom lines. So we talk about triple bottom lines a lot: social, economic, and environmental. And I do think that's a good way of dividing it, but I think there are many others, and we can dive down and be really nuanced. So if I had one bottom line that defines my work, it's about how much we're investing in homes. Because I think that it's so clear that if you don't have somewhere that you can rest well, that you can go home and have a dinner, that you can feel safe and comfortable when you take a shower, if you don't have that, how do we expect to do well in our classes or our jobs or be good friends or sisters or parents, or, all of those things? So I'm passionate about housing, housing quality, housing access, housing affordability. I say that there are 3 types of houses. Houses that exist and nobody lives in them, housing that exists and somebody lives in it, and houses we wish we could build. That's all of them. The market forces define so much of what we can do: policy, regulatory environment. But what we have found is that where we are, the vast majority of funding comes for this one: houses that exist and people live in them. And specifically for low-income homeowner occupants. That's who I can get funding to work with. So out of the 3 housing types, the one I primarily work on is that one. And a lot of people ask me, like, is that architecture? Are you doing architecture? Is this architecture? And I think it must be. It maybe wasn't always defined that way, but we have to define it this way. Because what happens is that grant writers come to these houses who have no built environment expertise at all. Because typically architects have turned our noses up at this house, right? And so these grant writers come and they say, well, what does this house need? And very likely might even just overlook this electrical panel, right? They might say, well, I guess we got to fix the front door, and then the house burns down. And I don't say that lightly. We've had it happen many times. The other thing is that people who aren't built environment expertise do when they come to a house like this is they decide they're going to guess how much it costs to fix the house. So then I, wearing my builder hat, bid on the project and they go, whoa, I had a $4,000 budget and you just bid 20? And I said, well, where in the world did you get $4,000? So I think it's this incredible opportunity that we as architects can say, I have this expertise, and it's an untapped market. It's a wonderful opportunity despite it being within this really inequitable context. This is something else that people say, is this architecture? But I think it must be also. The place that I live, the Mississippi Delta, is the area of the United States with the highest concentration of persistent poverty counties in the country. And persistent poverty means that multiple markers of poverty have been high for contiguous decades. And in these counties, it's usually almost as long as we've collected data. So you can see in the Mississippi Delta, 14 of 18 counties have persistent poverty. And is that an architecture question? I think it must be. So my office works very aggressively on home repair grants. Since 2019, we've done over 130 home repairs, and we've studied what we're doing so that we can share it more widely. So in terms of household characteristics, this is the household, not the home itself. The average age is almost exactly the same, so it always catches me. So the average age of the homeowners that I work with is 66. There's usually just one person. The vast, vast majority of my clients are single Black females. A lot are widows, and the vast majority are retired. And so we're talking about extremely low incomes. And so when we look at this income, $10,000 to $14,999 is by far the highest demographic. So some of this is because people are retired. But the other issue, and we talked about this in a studio today, is that we said, well, what's minimum wage? In Mississippi, it's $7.25. And I said, what do you think that is in an annual salary? And the answers were like, $35,000, right? Like, absolutely not. Minimum wage is less than $15,000 a year. So you can work full-time and be in that $10,000 to $15,000 category. So the average age of the home is just 3 years younger than the average age of the occupant, so 63. As I said, our building stock is the oldest it's ever been in the United States, largely because the United States is the oldest it's ever been, but also because we are continually producing housing at a slower rate, and we're losing housing at a faster rate. 55% of my houses need a new roof, must have a new roof. When I say home repair grants, people say, do you do cabinets? I say, I've never had the budget to get to it. If I did, I would. Do you do painting? Basically never. These are basic health and safety innovations. Every once in a while, we get to a little bit of weatherization. As I said, we did that job training program, but man, often we don't have the budget to hire the people we trained. So we find that on average, we can spend about $11,600 per house. That's not because that's all the house needs, that's because that's all the house usually qualifies for, despite how creative we try to be with our funding stacks. National models say that they think there's about 825 houses that would qualify for these grants in the county where I live. And if we spent our average expense on them, about $11,600, we would need $9.5 million in my county alone. I say that that's incorrect. We need at least an average of $25,000 per house, and I have at least 990 houses in need in my county alone, which comes to almost $25 million to address the existing home repair needs today. What's wild is that if we compare that to what it would mean to build new housing, it's about 1/6 of that cost. So this is our most efficient way to ensure that people are housed. Right now, we're doing the most we've ever done as an office. So we're averaging about $765,000 a year through 4 funding sources. And if we divide that out, we need 63 years to address the current home repair needs. So I'll be 103. And that doesn't deal with any home repair, housing deterioration that happens over the next 63 years. It also doesn't take into account that we are in this wild political climate where the 2 middle ones, the big numbers, are extremely likely to not come back this year or in future years. So we're looking at maybe having $180,000 rather than $765,000. I didn't even do the math on how many years that is. A lot of people say, this is charity, right? This is this is gifts that need to be given to those in need. But when we look at what the investment is, what the cost of not making an investment is, it's astounding. We can look at things like Medicare costs. And studies have been done that show that investing in housing, $1 in housing preservation can save as much as $7 in Medicare costs. And I'm not going to read through all of this, but I think this is, again, a slide where we could say, is this architecture? But the way that you all are learning about it and practicing it in your studios, and that I'm really proud to practice it in my office, is that yes, this must be architecture. And it's not a question anymore of if we're looking beyond the site boundaries, right? We must look at the impacts and outcomes of our work. Because we're not doing architecture just to be architects, right? We're not making buildings that will stand by themselves and be sculptures alone. Architecture is about humans who will occupy that space. Just like with the post-occupancy, they're not coming and then they're leaving. It's people who will be in a place for the long term, like Sandra. And so that's my bottom line, is we might not be getting rich in our firm, but we're realizing these really enriching goals of creating and preserving as much housing as we can. So I purposefully gave myself 40 minutes so that we could talk.
Who has questions for Emily? Yes.
What made you choose your business minor?
Oh, I really like math, which is funny because I said you don't have to be good at math. But I also think economics is interesting, and I will also say it was a wonderful break that my business minor classes were really easy compared to my architecture classes. Yeah.
We've had a few enterprise roles fellows from our program here, and sadly, that program went away a couple of years ago. But I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about your experience with enterprise roles,
I'd love to. People always say, well, you're not from Mississippi, right? And I'm not. But then they say, how'd you get there? And I say, I won. So even in undergrad, I knew I wanted to practice sort of community-based architecture, but there wasn't really a term for it then. And I certainly didn't know how that could become this career path. I didn't know there were 50 ways to use your license then. And but I got to move to Argentina, and that opened my mind to the ideas that architecture could be something that wasn't for like the 1% and the wealthiest. They gave me that language and that insight for the first time. And then I quit architecture for a minute, and I did construction because I was like, I don't know how to put things together. And I met David Perks, who's run the Gulf Coast Community Design Studio in Biloxi for decades, and is incredibly generous with his time. And David Perks he was hosting an Enterprise Rose Architectural Fellow. And so for the next 5 years or so, I stalked that program. And I would watch people win these amazing opportunities. So what happened is Enterprise Community Partners, which, depending on who you talk to, is this benevolent, generous organization, or is this like evil, greedy organization? And of course, they're both true at the same time. And so Enterprise Community Partners for about 23 years, I think, had a program where nonprofit affordable housing developers could apply to them and say, if we had an architect who was going to come in and be creative and innovative and engage with the community, if we had them for 3 years, this is what we'd do with them. And Enterprise would pick 2 to 5 organizations a year, anywhere in the country, and then they'd advertise them. And so you wouldn't say, I want to be a fellow, you'd say, I want to be the Santa Fe fellow. And then you try to win. And so in 2012, they advertised a number of opportunities, and man, they sounded like they were great places. There was one in Santa Fe, and there was one in Asheville, North Carolina, and I was like, oh, I'd like to live in those places. And then I read Greenwood, Mississippi, and I didn't really want to move to Greenwood, Mississippi. I'd never been there. I'd never been anywhere except the coast in Mississippi, and I wanted to hike. There's no mountains, totally flat. But I read that job, and it was my job. It was made for me. So then I moved there. I won, moved to Mississippi at the end of 2012, and had this incredible experience of 3 years of this fellowship. And if you have an opportunity to be part of a fellowship or develop a peer network, it's changed my life. That to this day I can call someone and say, how are you dealing with mold on Indian reservations right now? Because I'm stuck on the same question. Or I can call someone and say, what's happening in Appalachia right now with down payment assistance? Because we're trying to get it and we're stuck on the way we used to do it. So it's just this incredible peer network that I once found intimidating. It turns out a peer network is just friends that you share professional interests with. So the Rose Fellowship went away about, just a few years ago, and we're always trying to resurrect it because there isn't a comparable one until that, and because it was an early career one. But there's a mid-career called the Loeb, L-O-E-B. So it comes later, but I highly recommend if you're interested in community engaged architecture and or art. They have both through Loeb. McDowell has a much shorter term fellowship, but you do get to be part of an amazing network. And then of course there's the more well-known and less design-specific programs like Fulbright. But all of those are exciting because you have to come up with your idea, right? What kind of architect do you want to be? And then you write Fulbright all about it and see if they'll pay you to do your passion. Yes, Malcolm.
You showed a picture of your
Yeah, I should just go to that one, my fave.
I'm curious about what each of them does.
Yeah. Everything. Everyone does everything. No, that's not quite true. Sorry, it was longer than I remembered. Okay. So my husband is right behind me. That's Richard. And really, we sort of co-run everything. But if I'm about 80% sort of design, grant writing, planning, strategic outreach, and 20% construction, he's the opposite. Maybe not quite 80% these days, because this is Dontavius, that's Jeremiah, and this is William, and they are incredible. They all came to us in different ways, but Dontavius specifically was in one of those job training programs I talked about. So he came and he got his carpentry training with us, and we liked him too much to let him go through the job interview process where people got placed with other firms. So we kept him. He's wonderful. Jeremiah actually worked for us sort of before we were a firm. He kind of just walked onto a job site when I was a brand new Rose Fellow trying to figure things out and said he really wanted to learn some carpentry, and he's been around. So he's been with us for 12 years. But they're full-time construction and continue to develop skill sets all the time. So Dontavius has been doing our energy auditing for a while now. Jeremiah just gets better and better at carpentry. And then William is kind of more of the lots of different things, really nice drywall and all kind of the fill in the blanks. Because that's hard to find, somebody who can jump in. And then Michelle, who's over here on the upper right, I love being a Rose Fellow so much. And a few years after I founded my own firm, said, hey, what if we were hosts? So we applied to Enterprise to host a Rose Fellow. And so Michelle was our fellow after I was a fellow and stuck around. So it's been about 7 years since she moved to Greenwood. So she's also an architect with just a lot of background in community engaged design, but also she has more of the technical sort of corporate background than I do, so thank goodness. She's in charge of our AutoCAD standards and things like that.
First of all, how do you see yourself operating as a for-profit business over a non-for-profit business? What are the advantages? How do you compare those two in terms of how someone might want to operate this way?
I love that. Thank you. That's a great question. So he said, how is it different to be a for-profit versus a nonprofit?
Go for things that are like a community development corporation.
That's right.
And that's all they do. They find money. It's a whole other world. I know that from the work that I do. Talk about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So I would say the biggest difference that just immediately comes to mind, and I think about most days, is that I don't have to ask anyone for permission. I can write a check and sign that check. I have no board. If I want to have my mission creep, it's up to me. If I want to keep it tight.
That if you were a nonprofit, you would have a board.
I would have a board, yes.
Executive director, who you probably would be.
Yes, and there's a lot of complexity in that too. A lot of people figure it out, but if, let's say that I said I want to be a nonprofit, there's some real challenges there too. Am I on the board, or am I a director, and do I get paid? Because your executive director almost always with a nonprofit is a paid staff person, so they don't have a vote. So they don't actually, they can make a lot of recommendations to the board, but they don't legally control the organization. So I've known more than one nonprofit where an executive director, sometimes a good executive director, a strong one, sometimes a very bad one, is ousted by the board. And sometimes it's an informed board, and sometimes it's a very uninformed board. And so there's a certain loss of control if you aren't on the board. But if you are on the board, you typically cannot be paid, or there's some real limitations, especially in the way that like we'll often bid things out. And so what we had found was that first and foremost that we didn't need to go directly for grants, that we always had a partner we haven't ever not been able to go for a funding source we wanted because we couldn't find a partner. Yeah. Anytime we've identified a funding source that we wanted to go after, we had somebody we could call and say, do you want to do this together? And they say, yes.
Sorry, do you feel like you need to make that phone call to a partner because you're a for-profit business?
We must usually, yes.
Okay, that's the thing.
Yes, so like the HUD grant that I showed, that's the largest funding source we're using for home repairs right now, only goes to municipalities. So I call the mayor of the town I live in and say, can we do this? And she says, no, this is too hard, we can't do this. And I say, what if I'll do everything for you? And she says, okay. Then I go see her once a month and she signs 45 things. Or the USDA money, that can be a nonprofit or a municipality. So I actually run 3 of those right now, 2 through counties and 1 through a nonprofit. And so there's that, or I think about like the Rosedale Freedom Project where we had the high schoolers who did the participatory budgeting. In that case, they came to us and said, we really, really need some help preparing for a funding application. And I think I charged them like, because we get to choose, right? Because I didn't have to ask anybody's permission. I think I charged them like $350 for some work. And so we did some renderings, but then they were on our radar. So the next year when the Mississippi Arts Commission came out with a building fund for the arts that could do exactly what they needed, we called them and said, hey, you need to apply for the building fund for the arts from MAC. And they said, okay, can you help? And we helped a little bit, and then they got it, and then they give us a $100,000 contract that we never could have gone for directly as a construction company.
So it really is on a project-by-project basis.
It's totally unique all the time. And I really love that also as a small business owner, I have all this agility and every day is different. So I'm writing grants and I'm calling mayors, and then I'm running the bandsaw to make the alligator head in the afternoon.
I for one can say that understanding all of the availabilities of different grants, local availability, state availability, federal availability, if that will continue.
Yeah.
The idea that's a whole language in and of itself, and a world and an expertise in and of itself. And that's something you definitely need to get acclimated to and learn if you want to be in that world.
And I couldn't have done it if I hadn't won the Rose Fellowship that Owen asked about, because during that time I had a salary, and I'm very open about money. I think people are very private about money, and I'm not. During that time I made $47,500 a year, and at 27 that was the most I'd ever made, and I was really excited. And my husband was starting our firm, and I also had health insurance through my fellowship, and a stipend for my computer and my programs and things like that. And so I think like the first year I was a fellow, he made almost the same amount of money, and then the next year I was a fellow when he was really setting up the construction company, he made like $15,000 total. And then the next year it was a little bit more. But during that time was when we learned that landscape. I wrote my first grants, and I got to know people, and I understood who to call to ask questions, who would just tell me the truth about the grant that they'd applied for the last year that, gave me the secret I needed to call the right person. So I learned all of that kind of without risk. I knew I had a salary and I knew I had time. And then that ended at the end of 2015. And the first 6 months or so of 2016, I was like, the rug was gone, right? I had no idea if I would make any money, and I would pay myself out only after a project was done, and it was kind of wild, right? But we'd set up just enough that we were okay. And there's also some real, living in a place like rural Mississippi has some real pros and cons. One of those pros is that it's extremely affordable, extremely affordable place to live. So I currently pay myself about $70,000 a year, and I could make a decision every single day that I could drive that up or down, right? And I'm very transparent about it. Nobody in my firm makes more than twice as much as anyone else. I have that sort of 50% max gap. And so I know we're not Amazon, but you think about the lowest paid person versus the highest paid person, right? And this multiplier of difference in pay scale. And so I think double is the max that I'm comfortable with. And that's also something, that I love being a small business owner, that we get to think about that. Most of my team is salaried because you get to choose if you're salaried or hourly based on what works for you. And because it's easy for me to administer either way. So almost everybody's gone salaried, but I like to be hourly. So when Rosedale Freedom Project calls, I can charge them some absurdly low number. And then, when Bank of America wants a little consultation on a grant, I can charge them an absurdly high number, and it averages out to about $35 an hour. Thank you. That's great to end on.
What's going to happen that you have that budget that sort of money is not
Yeah.
we're talking about
Yeah.
how is that going to work?
That is a bummer. And the answer is I don't know. But we survived one previous administration, one previous Trump administration, and we'll survive another. And it might look totally different, but I think that living somewhere where the sort of the depths of the racialized injustices are so present sometimes feels like sort of a tertiary trauma for me. But it also has given me so much perspective. My clients, I should say, have given me so much perspective on resilience and persevering and pivoting and being agile. And so there's actually nobody more reassuring than my clients, that they say, we believe in you, and we believe in the good work that your team is doing, and that you'll find a way to stick around. So I hope that's true. And if it's not, we'll pivot even further. Yeah, but we do. I can't overstate how dire the situation does feel right now. I just have a sort of absurdly sunny attitude despite it.
Any final questions?
Thank you for having me. It was a pleasure.